she'll listen closely. When darkness wraps the world and dreams begin to stir, you've arrived at the right place. Welcome to Between Dreams and Shadows, the sanctuary of stories that live between sleep and the unknown. Here, every tale is more than a story. It's a portal to hidden worlds, forgotten secrets, whispers from beyond, and shadows that speak as your eyes begin to close. If you're drawn to mysteries, haunting legends, and stories that send shivers down your spine, this channel is your new nighttime ritual. Before we begin, I invite you to become part of this growing nightbound community. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale. New stories drop regularly, always under the veil of night. Like this video if you enjoy that chill before sleep. It helps this channel grow and lets me bring you deeper, darker stories. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a strange dream or felt something watching in the dark? Your experience might inspire the next tale now. Take a deep breath, turn off the lights, leave the world behind, and get ready to drift between dreams and shadows, setting the atmosphere. Lana Park never liked the quiet after midnight. She lived alone in a narrow Victorian house at the edge of a forgotten town where the lamps flickered like uncertain thoughts and the wind seemed to whisper secrets only the dark could understand. The house, once her grandmother's, had a peculiar silence to it. Not peaceful, not empty, just watchful. Each night, at exactly 11:57 p.m., the air in her bedroom changed. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It was aware. The wallpaper seemed to pulse slightly in the dim moonlight. The shadows, long and deliberate, clung to corners like they were listening. Eleanor often stayed up reading by candlelight, claiming electricity made her migraines worse. But it wasn't the headache she was avoiding. It was sleep. Because sleep meant surrender. And when she surrendered, she could feel something just out of reach. Watching, waiting, breathing without breath. That night, the wind carried a scent, metallic, like rusting coins or blood just beneath the skin. She paused her reading. Her candle flickered not from draft, but as if recoiling from something unseen. The room stretched quieter, the kind of quiet that had depth. A soft tapping echoed from the attic above her, then stopped, then resumed, rhythmic, patient, almost polite. She closed her book without looking down. The title was irrelevant now, because this wasn't the first night, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. There was a story her grandmother used to tell her when she was smaller, whispered warning, passed down through hushed generations. A figure who visited in silence, who came not for harm, but for remembrance. A faceless man, forgotten by time, seeking to be seen, and Eleanor, whether she liked it or not, was starting to remember him. She sat still, candle trembling in its holder, breath shallow, heart ticking louder than the clock. The air shifted again, brushing her cheek like a memory that didn't belong to her. Something outside her perception was trying to enter, and yet there was no knock, no voice, only that tapping above, faint, measured, waiting, the kind of sound that dares you to ask what it means, or worse, to go find out. She didn't, not yet. She just sat there, candlelight dancing like it was afraid of the dark. But Eleanor knew something was already in the house. The first signs of disturbance. Eleanor didn't sleep that night, or the next. At first, she told herself the noise in the attic was just the old house settling. That's what people say when they want to explain away what they don't understand. Woodworks, pipes groan, wind scratches. But things were starting to move. It began with the mirror on her bedroom wall, an antique with a bronze frame, mottled with age. One morning, she found it tilted ever so slightly downward. Not enough to fall, just enough to make her reflection seem a fraction too far away, as if it wasn't her looking back. Later that evening, her favorite mug, one she always left on the kitchen windowsill was resting on the dining table, perfectly centered. Eleanor didn't move it. No one else had a key. She picked it up, felt it cold to the touch, and noticed a single fingerprint on the rim, smudged, too large to be hers. The air in the house grew thick, not humid-dense, like a pressure built slowly in the lungs, urging her to hold her breath. Shadows clung longer than they should have. They bent in ways light shouldn't allow, gathering in the crevices between doors, beneath furniture, under her bed. She swept the entire house 3 times that week, top to bottom. Nothing. No signs of break-in. No rats, no mold, no reason. But the unease didn't care about reasons. By Friday, the tapping had grown bolder. It wandered from the attic to the hallway, to just behind her bedroom wall. Always at 11:57. Always in patterns. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Longer pause. 4. The rhythm made no sense, until it did. She realized it matched the sound of her own heartbeat when she was afraid. That night, Eleanor sat in the hallway with all the lights on, not reading, not moving, listening at exactly 11:57. The air changed again. This time, her bedroom door creaked open, just a fraction, enough to cast a thin shadow against the wall across from her. But it didn't move. Nothing stepped through. Instead, the hallway grew colder from her position on the floor. Eleanor noticed something new. The shadows on the wall were wrong. The lamp behind her cast a clear silhouette of her body. But on the opposite side of the wall, another shadow was forming. It had no head, just a broad figure. Still, perfectly still. Her skin prickled when she turned quickly to look. Behind her nothing, but the shadow on the wall remained motionless, unexplained, faceless. The lights flickered. She stood slowly, trying not to blink, not to breathe too hard. But her reflection in the mirror at the end of the hall was different this time. Not wrong delayed, as if it took just half a second too long to catch up with her. Eleanor felt something break in her mind, not like a crack, but a drift. The way a ship might lose anchor and slowly begin to float into dark waters without realizing it. She whispered to herself, "I'm imagining this." But even the silence didn't agree. The sound that shouldn't exist the next night. Eleanor unplugged every electrical device in the house. No clocks, no radios, no refrigerator humming in the kitchen. She wanted silence, pure silence. The kind that could either comfort her or confirm something worse. She sat on the edge of her bed, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the empty corner of the room where the shadows were always darkest. It was just before midnight when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to this world. At first it was soft, a gentle hum, like someone whispering through a wall made of fog, indistinct, just on the edge of comprehension. Not languid, but structured, rhythmic, as if it carried intent. Eleanor leaned forward, candlelight warping as she moved. She strained to hear, breath shallow, heart already sinking with the soft pulses in the air. Then came the voices, not loud, not screaming, but murmuring low, like a lullaby meant for someone long dead. A layered chorus of unintelligible phrases, overlapping and slipping beneath each other like seaweed on a tide. One of the voices, just one, rose clearer than the others. It said her name, not shouted, not moaned, whispered directly into her right ear. Eleanor. She jerked away, spinning in place. No one, nothing. The room was still as stone. The whisper hadn't come from across the room. It had bypassed the room, entered her mind directly, like it was already inside. She reached for the old rotary phone in the hallway. No dial tone, just a quiet, static breath on the line, and then a man's exhale. Slow, steady, like he'd been waiting for her to call. She didn't hang up. She couldn't. Her fingers felt locked. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice trembling. No response, just a breathing, just presence. Then a sound emerged through the receiver. subtle, wet. Someone was smiling, the sound of lips parting over dry teeth, the faint creak of facial muscles that shouldn't be there or maybe weren't. And when the line went dead, she heard the same sound again. Behind her, she spun around, dropping the receiver. The hallway was empty, but her reflection in the mirror at the far end. It wasn't alone anymore. Standing just behind her mirrored self was a tall figure. Head smooth and blank. No eyes, no mouth. Just a flesh-colored void where a face should be. As if the world had forgotten to finish him, Eleanor turned. The hallway was still empty. She looked back to the mirror. Now she was alone in it again. But something lingered in the air. A low humming that burrowed into her skull like a forgotten melody. The sound that shouldn't exist was no longer just a noise. It was a signal, a message, a warning wrapped in curiosity, inviting her to ask what he wanted. But she already knew the answer. He didn't want to hurt her. He wanted her to remember the presence without a face after that night. Mirrors became strangers to Eleanor. She covered most of them with old sheets. Except for the one she couldn't bring herself to touch, the hallway mirror. It had become a threshold. Not a reflection, but a window. She avoided it during the day, but as dusk fell, something strange began to happen. At first, she thought she was imagining it. The faint scrape of wood shifting, as if someone tall had brushed the ceiling. A slow creak on the stairs, even though she hadn't moved in hours. She started to leave small items, deliberately placed objects on shelves and doorknobs, hoping to catch a mistake. And she did. The red scarf she left coiled like a spiral on the banister one night was tied into a noose shape the next morning. The hallway closet door, which she always locked, was ajar one morning, its hinges yawning slightly. Books on her shelf leaned the wrong way. No loud crashes. No broken glass. Just a quiet, unrelenting rearrangement of the world around, as if the house itself was being slowly rewritten while she slept. Eleanor didn't scream. Screaming had become meaningless. What she feared now was not violence. It was recognition. One evening, she entered the living room to find all the candles she had left untouched, now flickering in unison despite no matches nearby. They glowed not yellow, but blue. The flames swayed rhythmically to a breeze that didn't exist. That's when she felt it. Not a hand, not a brush of air, but a pressure, settling across her back like a stare, too close, too focused. A weightless presence sinking into her skin, observing her from inside the same room and yet, not from this world. She froze, and in the silence, something moved, out of the corner of her eye. A porcelain figurine twisted on its pedestal. Not fell, not slid, turned, as if to face her. Its small, blank face mirrored the shape she had seen in the mirror. Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the subtle shifts of a presence that never showed itself completely. But it was there. It never made noise anymore. It didn't have to. Even when she sat completely still, she felt its gaze crawl up her spine, watching, not threatening, not comforting, simply existing where it had no right to. She began to write in a journal to anchor her thoughts, to document, to prove to herself she hadn't lost her grip. But the next night, she found the journal torn in half carefully, surgically along the spine. Inside, in handwriting not her own, were 4 words. I used to be. And beneath it, a single smear of something dark and sticky, the color of dried blood, and the scent of old sorrow. Eleanor sat in her chair until dawn, unmoving, as the faceless man stood just out of view, because now, she knew isolation doesn't mean safety. And silence doesn't mean alone. The unspoken warning the next night. Something new began. Eleanor woke not with a start, but with a sense of arrival, as though something had entered her dreams and pulled her back into her body. Her eyes opened, and before the shapes of her room came into focus, she noticed it. Everything was exactly as she left it, and that's what terrified her. The rug was centered, the door was closed, the candle was still burned halfway, the mirror still uncovered. But she didn't remember falling asleep. There were no signs of the familiar disruptions, no whispering voices, no warped reflections, no rearranged objects, only stillness, as if he was waiting. The silence was thick, not oppressive, expectant. The kind of quiet that suggests a question has been asked, and the world is holding its breath for an answer. Then she saw it, on the mirror, written in a fine, near-invisible scrawl, not with a marker, not with ink, but something oily, the consistency of smeared ash. "Do you remember now?" She stepped closer. The words were on the mirror, not in it, but as she stared into her own eyes, her reflection did not move when she did. It stood still for a beat. Too long. Then it blinked on once, slowly. She didn't blink. Eleanor staggered backward. The air tasted like metal and rain, the scent of an old funeral home, faint, distant, but real. And then she began to notice something more horrifying than any apparition, a pattern. Every object that had been moved, every flickering candle, every footstep on the stair, they weren't random. She wrote them down, mapped them like constellations, and realized they formed a message, a shape, a symbol. It was ancient and undefined, but intuitive, a spiral that led inward to nothing, like an eye that no longer had a pupil, like a face that had forgotten its purpose. And the message was clear, though no one had spoken it. He doesn't just visit, he remembers you. That's when the scratching began again. Not in the attic. From inside the walls, soft, rhythmic like nails, or fingertips brushing against the old wooden beams. Moving slowly, deliberately, tracing a pattern around her. First, behind her bed, then beneath the floor, then overhead. Following the symbol, she stood in the center of her room, as if inside a ritual circle, not of her making. Heart pounding slowly but heavily, candlelight casting a faint blue halo. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "What do you want from me?" There was no answer, but the scratching stopped, and in its place, a sound so low it could only be felt. A breath, not hers, a breath from behind. She turned slowly. Nothing but on her wall, now freshly written with the same ashen smear, were 3 new words. "Not from you." Eleanor's hands trembled, because she finally understood. This wasn't about her. She wasn't being haunted, she was being used. Whatever had come into her home, it was waiting for someone else, and she was simply keeping the door open. The moment of truth that night. Eleanor didn't light any candles. She sat in the darkness, the only glow coming from the hallway mirror, which now pulsed with a dim, unnatural luminescence, as though it were no longer reflecting her world, but revealing another. The symbol had spread. What began as a shape in her journal and subtle patterns in object placement had now appeared, faintly etched into the wood of her walls, and burned into the fabric of her curtains. Spirals, open circles, fractured faces, drawn without mouths or eyes. He was no longer just near, he was manifesting, and Eleanor could feel it. In her muscles, in her thoughts, in the corners of her memory that didn't belong to her. She'd begun to have visions, not dreams, but flashes. A tall figure in a field of ash, hands outstretched, reaching toward something blurred and distant, always just out of view, always faceless. When she closed her eyes, she could feel him approaching, but not out of malice, out of need. That night, as the wind pushed against her windows, in a rhythm far too measured to be natural, Eleanor made a decision. No more hiding, no more whispering. If he was using her to open a door, then she would walk through it. She climbed the creaking attic stairs, barefoot and calm, the boards groaning like sighs beneath her. Her breath was steady, but the air grew denser with every step, not cold, but full. Like the space itself had become alive. The attic door, which had never opened fully, no matter how hard she pushed, now swung wide without resistance. Inside, the room was exactly how her grandmother had left it. Antique trunks, a rocking chair near a boarded window, old quilts folded like offerings. But there was something new now. A mirror dot. It hadn't been there before. Tall, framed in cracked wood, covered in a black velvet cloth that pulsed faintly, as if something beneath it were breathing slowly, rhythmically, in perfect sync with Eleanor's own chest. She approached it. The room held its breath, and from within the mirror, though it remained covered, she could hear a voice, but not one made of words. It sounded like a memory being unforgotte, and like a childhood home burning, like a promise never kept, and with a hand that didn't feel like hers. Eleanor reached out and lifted the cloth. The reflection was not her attic. It was a dark corridor, stone walls, flickering torches, and at the very end, a door, not modern, not old, not of this world, made of something gray and rippling, as though sculpted from shadow and bone. Behind her, the air in the attic shifted. A soft exhale brushed against her neck. She turned. Nothing but in the mirror. The corridor door creaked open, and the faceless man stepped through. He did not walk. He floated, not in defiance of gravity, but in defiance of existence, as if he was something not meant to move, and yet forced himself to anyway. Eleanor did not run. She did not scream. She stepped closer to the mirror until her breath fogged the glass. And for the first time, he paused. The figure raised a hand, not to harm, but to mirror her, palm to palm, skin to surface. And in that moment, she asked herself a single, trembling question. What if this isn't a haunting? What if it's a summoning? She pressed her hand to the glass, and the mirror rippled. The inevitability of darkness when Eleanor touched the mirror. The cold wasn't what surprised her. It was the softness like skin. It gave slightly beneath her palm, and the surface of the glass pulsed once, like a heart reluctantly beating for the first time in centuries. She felt it travel up her arm and into her chest, spreading through her like a slow, encroaching tide. And just like that, the attic vanished. She stood now inside the corridor. No door, no reflection, no attic. Only cold stone walls, bathed in dim, flickering torchlight. The air smelled of rust and rot, and yet beneath it all was something achingly familiar, like the scent of old paper and wood polish from her grandmother's study, or the faint sweetness of the tea her mother used to drink at night. Every step she took echoed forever, but not forward. The echoes trailed behind her, as if they were being collected. She was no longer walking through a place. She was being remembered by it, and in that corridor stretching too far, bending impossibly, she saw them, others, shadows in the shape of people, pressed into the walls, not carved, not painted, absorbed, eyes forever shut, mouths gently open, as if caught in the act of whispering their last word, and then erased. She turned a corner and saw the figure again, the faceless man, standing still, waiting. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a row of beings, tall and faceless, their heads bowed. Each bore a slight difference: longer arms, thinner necks, cracked torsos, yet they all pulsed with the same silent energy. Eleanor realized then that the man wasn't a singular entity. He was a fragment of something larger, something collective, something ancient and hollow. And he had chosen her not because she was special, but because she was forgotten. She took one more step, and a sound bloomed inside her skull, not in her ears, but within her memory. You opened the door. You're the threshold now. A calm terror settled in. This was never about possession, never about death. It was about replacement. And as she stood before the man with no face, he reached out, not with malice, but with offering. His hand hovered before her chest, where her heart pounded defiantly. He was giving her a choice: go back and live knowing she had been marked, tethered forever to something watching from beyond the veil, or take his hand and become part of the silence. The room around her flickered, then blurred, the attic trying to pull her back. She could hear her name again, this time not whispered, but wept by her own voice from the other side of the mirror. because Eleanor understood. Now there was no escaping him. You didn't defeat the faceless man. You either forgot him, or let him remember you completely. The fear that stays the world did not end. There was no flash, no scream, no collapse of reality. Only stillness. Eleanor stood in the attic once more, though she didn't remember how she returned. The mirror now reflected nothing, not her, not the room behind her. Just a blank, silvery fog swirling behind the glass like breath trapped on the wrong side. She felt it immediately. She wasn't alone, not in the house, not in her body. She carried something now, something that had been waiting for her, not in the attic or the mirror, but in time itself. A passenger, a watcher, a faceless truth that had once been a man, then a memory, and now a shadow wearing the shape of silence. In the following days, she tried to return to normalcy. She cooked, she read, she cleaned, but objects still moved when she looked away. Shadows still lingered a fraction longer than they should, and the mirror, it never stopped glowing. More disturbingly, Eleanor herself had changed. When she passed by windows at night, her reflection was delayed, as though the part of her that lived in light had been replaced by something slower, something cautious. Neighbors stopped waving. Her voice on phone calls sounded unfamiliar, and her journal, the one she had written so desperately in, night after night, it was full of entries she didn't remember writing. One read, "He speaks through the quiet now. I don't need to see him to feel his will." Another simply said, "I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid he's not done." And beneath that, a small sketch of her own face, only it wasn't hers anymore. The features were missing. Blank eyes, no mouth. A perfect echo of what haunted her. And so the truth settled over Eleanor. Quiet and thick like snowfall. She hadn't escaped. She had been opened, and through her, the faceless man had found a way in. Not just into her home, but into the edges of perception. Into the cracks of reality, where fear lingers when the world goes quiet. Every night now, she feels it. That same calm dread before sleep. A presence in the room. A weight on the bed. He never shows himself again, because he no longer needs to. He is in her gestures, her choices, her thoughts that arrive too early or too late. He is in the absence of certainty, the slow erosion of familiarity, and the worst part, no one else sees it, because he does not appear to those being haunted, only to those who are becoming him.